Hi everyone, my name is Raheen Khan, and welcome to another episode of Food is Life. We're so excited to have you today to join us, and I want to go ahead and start with first introducing our co-host, Jacqueline McNeil. So let me go ahead and formally do that, and then Jacqueline will introduce our guest speaker for today, Chef Justin Andrews. So Jacqueline is an undergraduate student studying applied human nutrition at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. She's been an MX or Meal Exchange chapter leader for the past year and is in the midst of working with MSVU Student Union to establish a community kitchen on the MSVU campus. Jacqueline's is passionate about student and culturally food security, food system sustainability, and Indigenous food sovereignty, and hopes to continue her studies pursuing these topics. So welcome, Jacqueline. Very excited to have a student leader co-host this week. So I'm really glad you're here.
Hi there. I'm very excited to be here as well. It's a great opportunity.
Wonderful. So do you want to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for today?
Sure. So today on the show, we have Justin Andrews. Justin is a professionally trained chef turned food scholar. After 5+ years of experience in the restaurant industry, he left to continue his education and pursue a career helping address systemic issues around our food supply. He is currently studying sustainability at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Justin has conducted a lot of his research on university food systems, the contracts they hold with large multinational food service providers, and the challenges they face trying to source more sustainable food. He is currently working as a research assistant on a study of local food systems and about farms that rely on migrant workers. He is also very passionate about health and nutrition and has taught many cooking classes and workshops with the hopes to inspire people to approach food with more intention. Justin is a board member of the Loaded Ladle, which is a nonprofit based at Dalhousie University, which provides free lunches 4 days a week to students and serves food to various community events and gatherings, which they call solidarity servings. The Loaded Ladle also puts on workshops ranging from cooking classes to anti-obsession training. The Loaded Ladle has partnered with Meal Exchange to help serve students in need during COVID-19 and delivering food boxes and to provide an alternative to their usual service due to the campus closures. So welcome, Justin.
For having me.
That's great. Thanks so much for being here. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
All right. So Justin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey from chef to scholar? We're really interested in what sparked your interest in food systems.
Yeah, so I went to university right out of high school, like a lot of my friends, and I thought I wanted to go to law school. And 2 years in, I realized that university wasn't for me at the time, and I decided to go to cooking school, encouraged by my dad, who did a year of culinary school and never ended up being a chef, decided to be a nurse, but thought cooking school was fun and I'd learned some good skills, and it was a third of the price of university, so I said, why not? And I loved it. Really enjoyed my time there. And while I was in cooking school, I got to write a paper on GMOs and Monsanto, which is now Bayer. And in doing that research, I really started to see some of the paper trail of these sketchy contracts between big agriculture and just started seeing a lot of issues in the food system. And then I graduated cooking school, was working as a chef for 5-ish years. And it was just starting to weigh on me that so many people couldn't afford the good food that I was cooking, all the food waste that happens in the industry, and just a lot of other sustainability issues. And I knew I wanted to work on more systemic change And I went to a local conference at MSVU called How We Thrive, and I met quite a few faculty from the College of Sustainability at Dal. And they really encouraged me to come in and take a look at the program. And I did. And I was like, this is it. I need to be back in university, and going back to school at 26 was the best thing that I could have ever done. So yeah, I've been at Dal now for 2 years, doing a double major in sociology and sustainability, and focusing on food whenever I can, but particularly from the social lens. So less about the environmental sustainability side, that's important, but I'm interested in the human side, worker exploitation in different countries on domestic soil, human patterns and behavior around food consumption, and all of that. So it's been a long ride, but here I am, and I'm enjoying being back in school.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that Justin, Jacqueline had just spoke about in your bio was just the fact that you're on the board of Loaded Ladle, and
Mm-hmm.
we had a really great partnership with Loaded Ladle at this time with Meal Exchange. Seeing with the pandemic, there was so many beautiful relationships that kind of sparked across the country. So really grateful for that relationship. Could you tell us more about Loaded Ladle, and what the work that they do?
Yeah. So the Loaded Ladle is a group based there at Dalhousie, and they started as a resistance towards the big food contracts the university was holding with Chartwells in the Student Union building. And a group of students, I think back in like 2008, 2009, it started as a group called Campus Action on Food, which eventually evolved into the Loaded Ladle. And they were frustrated about the lack of healthy food options, and they were decided they wanted to give out, free burritos to students in need, and they were told they couldn't do that. And they said, "What do you mean we can't give out free food? This should be a fundamental right to feed hungry people." And they kept getting shut down, and they kept persisting. And then the lineups for their burritos started getting so long that security could no longer shut the operation down. So they were forced into negotiation, and they were able to use this little kitchenette somewhere in the Student Union building and formally start serving various lunches. And over the years, that has evolved into them being formally ratified with the province as a non-for-profit cooperative. And the Ladle now has their own commercial kitchen in the Student Union building, where they do 4 lunch servings a week, which are completely free. And it's really evolved from just like a renegade mission to like this formal entity. And besides the kitchen, they do a number of workshops, anything from basic cooking classes, how to reduce food scraps, but they also do a lot of work around anti-oppression framework training, talk about workers' rights. So, the kitchen is kind of like the central meeting point, but then there's a whole range of kind of social justice, environmental issues wrapped around that. So they often do what they call lunch and learns. So people come to the kitchen and make lunch together. And then when the lunch kind of crowd dies down, we sit around the table and chat. So it's kind of nice that the food is like the focal point to kind of gather all these discussions together.
Right, exactly. Well, that's so beautiful, right? It's incredible how they started. Just to follow up to that, so how did you get involved into Loaded Ladle?
Yeah, so I taught a fermentation workshop for the Ladle a few years ago, before I even went back to Dal as a student. Every year, the Loaded Ladle does a workshop series called To the Root. And I did a fermentation workshop. I taught some folks how to make kimchi and sauerkraut and that kind of thing. And I really loved what they did. And I kept seeing job postings over the years for the Loaded Ladle, but I couldn't qualify because they were often funded by Canada Student Summer Jobs. And I kept seeing these awesome jobs, and I'm like, no. So it was actually a big reason why I went back to school, was to get the kind of experience I would need. And then once I came back to Dal, one of my really good friends, Brennis, is the current kitchen coordinator at the Loaded Ladle. So that was another magnet to bring me in. And I started volunteering in the kitchen a little bit, and I helped them teach a few more cooking classes and workshops. And they suggested that I apply for their board of directors. So I did, and I got elected. And my term was supposed to end in April, but because of COVID, we couldn't have our AGM, and all of us extended our board terms until at least the fall. So we've kind of now shifted because of COVID, and because the student union building is closed and classes went online, our in-person servings weren't feasible, and there's no one really around to feed, but we knew there was still students that needed access to healthy food. And we have maintained some great relationships with some of the local farmers markets and a few local farmers who have been supplying our kitchen for the past few years. So transitioning from buying produce for the kitchen to buying produce for these food boxes we've been doing was, I wouldn't say easy. I wasn't part of the organizing of the food box, so I don't want to say easy, because Laureen has been working quite hard making that happen, but we already had connections in place to do that. And I know that we got some money from Meal Exchange to help with this new program, and continue some salary for some of our staff over the summer to do this. So it was a bit of kind of adapting in the moment to be like, how do we feed people right now when we can't have our kitchen?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the big question that came up for us as well at Meal Exchange, right? Was like, what do we do now? We've always been an organization that really supports students to be leaders and ambassadors and to do advocacy on campuses and to try to talk to food services and, campuses about procurement of good food. But then in the moment, now we've got all these students that are precariously housed or dealing with, campus shutdowns and are actually looking. It's definitely been a journey for us as well. I'm really grateful, that we've gotten support from some of our funders and donors to be able to do the work. So it's really great
Hmm.
that Local Label has been a great partner for us out in Nova Scotia, because we've been across the country. So, and absolutely, it's definitely not easy for sure. I can tell you that, because we've
Yeah.
also not in the business of coordinating boxes either. But it was meaningful work, and still is. It's definitely something that we continue to do.
Yeah, and it's been nice throughout the lockdown because of the pandemic. The Loaded Ladle board meetings have kind of been this, I don't know, just lovely opportunity to check in and still feel some of that momentum of action, because everything really just got shut down, and a lot of the other community organizing that was happening just kind of got on pause, and things were really like heating up before the pandemic happened, especially around some protests around what's happening in Wet'suwet'en with the pipelines. And there were protests like every week, and people were showing up, and all of a sudden all that gets put on pause. And so I'm pretty grateful that we have these technologies now to chat online, and our work with the ladle was able to continue through Zoom meetings, and it just kept some energy flowing.
Mhm.
Um, the next question we have is, you had mentioned before that anti-oppression is kind of a core value of the Loaded Ladle, and you do
Mhm.
trainings around that. Can you just tell us a bit more about what that means to the Ladle, how it kind of influences the work that you do, and then how it might have changed due to the pandemic?
Right. Um, so yeah, the Loaded Ladle, I was kind of new to like anti-oppression frameworks until a couple of years ago, and um, but the ladle does a really great job of approaching that topic really gently and not in like any sort of shameful way. It's kind of just recognizing that um, there are some inherent imbalances in the world between different groups of people, and um, by addressing these and educating people around these issues, we can live more compassionately and create space for all of us to work together and thrive together. And so to be either staff or a board member of the Ladle, it's required within our bylaws that you attend at least one anti-oppression workshop. And it's the pretty basic workshop, just a general kind of introduction to various cultural and race issues, and really gentle ways of recognizing any inherent privileges you may have, and how that may help or hinder the movement. But then these principles go into other facets of the Ladle too. Like, for example, our hiring policy, we we do our best to create opportunities for marginalized groups to be part of this movement. And for example, a while ago, as part of a hiring committee, we were hiring a new staff member, and looking at all these resumes, it's not always about who has all the credentials. Because I came from a world where, if you got the credentials, you get the job, then recognizing that certain people may have it easier to go and get these credentials and to get their resume stacked up. And just because you have all of that doesn't mean you're the right candidate. And hiring someone with a less beefy resume, but they might have more lived experience of what it's like to be marginalized or what it's like to grow up food insecure. And that was a big challenge for me, to be honest. I was so new to that. I was like, why don't we hire this person? Look at their resume, and then realizing it's not about that. So things like that, where these anti-oppression ideals work their way into practical, tangible things where, we need to recognize that creating space for people is more complex than just their credentials. So that's just one example, but that really opened my eyes, and it's always a learning journey around these issues.
That's really awesome. That's it's really good to see that in the food world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially at the university.
So I actually wanted to, you spoke a little bit about some of your research also being around the role of migrant workers. So can you tell us, more about that and sort of the role of migrant workers and how they play into the food system?
Yeah. So Canada is in an interesting situation with agriculture where we have an aging farming population. And what I mean by that is the average age of our farmers in Canada is going up every year. So we don't have, new youth going into farming at a rate fast enough to keep the average age in an area where it kind of should be. The average age keeps going up as farmers are aging. And we have, I don't know how long we've been bringing migrant workers in, but the number in which we've been bringing in is also sometimes going up year after year. And as it stands right now, depending on where you look and how you count them, because there's a few different avenues that they come in, but my research, anywhere between 60,000 and 100,000 migrant workers just in agriculture alone. We bring in migrant workers for all types of sectors in the economy, but there's the SAWP program, SAWP, which stands for Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program. And that program, the number is 60-something thousand farmers. And I took a few classes with a prof of mine at Dal, Professor Fitting, and really hit it off. And she's a social anthropologist, so really studies these systems through the social lens. And she asked if I wanted to be part of this research team. And we were just, going to take a look at the migrant workers program, look at any kind of issues within that. I know as it stands, migrant workers get paid about minimum wage. And for them, that's 3 or 4 times more than what they would make at home. So they come and they work their butt off and take money back home for their families. But there is issues where they don't have some of the same social securities as a Canadian citizen would have. So if they get sick, we can send them home. If they get injured, there's not really any sort of financial support to keep them, if they're off work, they just don't get paid. Things like that. There were some issues. The exact details I can't speak exactly on because I'm kind of new to studying this, but we knew that there was just some weird issues within this program. And but then COVID happens.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, flights aren't flying, countries are shut down, and a lot of migrant workers, and this isn't just a Canadian problem, all through Europe, the United States, where migrant workers for farms are also common, they're struggling to get the workers. And we in Canada predominantly get workers from Jamaica and Mexico. And at some point in the early stages of the pandemic, the Mexican visa office was closed, so workers couldn't finalize their paperwork to fly in, and workers that had already been cleared through their paperwork, their flights aren't there. So there was some effort done to do private chartered flights to get workers in. However, once they got here, they had to do 2 weeks quarantine. And not allowed to work for 2 weeks. And so there's a lot of farms that are quite behind this year in planting. Just the other day, I was talking to a farmer and he said there's a 100-acre field of strawberries going to be plowed under, no one to harvest it. 100 acres, that's 100-ish football fields for people who don't know how big an acre is. And that's just one example. And there's also the issue of a lot of local workers who would have normally done fruit picking work that are now getting this CERB money from the government. So they're not out looking for part-time summer jobs. So from a lot of different angles, we're really short on farm labor. And we've got ourselves into this situation where we absolutely need these migrant workers, but then in situations where border restrictions are in place, and we're relying on other countries to do the paperwork to get people in, we're in a bit of a pickle. And it's just really tough. And hiring local workers in their place, a lot of farmers will say migrant workers are 2 to 3 times more efficient and hardworking than we just don't have like a workforce that is experienced. And what I've learned is that this work isn't just expendable labor. These migrant farmers are highly skilled, and they often return to the same farm year after year. And one of the farms that I'm doing field work on right now, they've been getting some of the same guys for over 15 years. So they know the equipment, they know the farm, they know all the things. So to bring in a new set of workers, you have to retrain them, and it's tough. So we're incredibly reliant on them, but it leaves us in a really vulnerable place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that just to, as a comment, just to say that like sometimes we don't really, or at least those that are not really thinking about the food systems don't really understand the value, of what it means to treat the migrant workers well and how much they actually do. I was speaking to somebody earlier in the week, probably in a couple of weeks on the show, we'll have somebody who's working with like a workers action center out in Windsor, and working with some of the migrant workers in Leamington and stuff like that, right, to talk about their rights. Because apparently some of them are actually not able to leave their farms anymore.
That's been a part of the COVID. I've read some articles about that. Yeah, where for weird liability reasons, they're worried about letting them go off into the cities on their weekends off and things. And that's not only a COVID thing. I've heard through the research in one of my classes that I took before, there's sometimes issues around migrant workers having a way into the city if they have a vehicle they can use, or do they have to book in advance to to get a ride into town. So that issue of being able to leave the farm is not a new issue. It's just become much more prominent because of the concerns about the virus. So the migrant workers' rights issue runs deep, for sure.
For sure. And that's all part of the whole, work that we're all doing, I guess, in some ways, right? The food justice, which is really important. It's nice to be able to talk about the different sort of elements that make that up. There's just so much work to be done. So thanks for all that you're doing. Go ahead, Jacqueline. I know you had another question.
Yeah. So the next one is like, what are some of the key challenges that universities typically face when they're trying to kind of switch and procure more sustainable food? And
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one. But I think one of the biggest issues off the bat is that universities are such a large space. Dalhousie has like something like 40,000 students plus all of the faculty and staff and researchers. It's like a little mini town, right? And we, cafeteria style eating, which really kind of came about post World War II, right? The factorization of everything, right? Is just that kind of production line. And, universities need to be able to purchase such large volumes of food. And currently, especially somewhere like Nova Scotia, things may be a little different in Ontario and Quebec where there's more around, but we have a pretty booming local food system, but as it stands, Nova Scotians eat about 87% of their food is from out of province, which was research conducted by the Ecology Action Center. And we just don't have the volume. So if you're trying to order food for 40,000 people, all these different outlets at the university, these cafeterias feeding thousands of students and residents, right now, it's just where are you going to get local food in that volume, the supply and the convenience that these places rely on of being able to place an order for food and get it the next day from Cisco or GFS and these big companies. Local farms often have 1 or 2 days a week they do deliveries. So to be able to plan in advance takes extra labor in order to have that type of ordering. So it becomes a staffing issue to even oversee more complicated systems. But some research I conducted last semester on this issue, I read examples from various universities across North America. And there was one, I can't remember which university, but they had created a staff position that they called a forager. And this forager position, it was their job to make these connections with local farms, with smaller businesses, and figure out how to fit that into their ordering strategy to be able to source more sustainable, more small scale, more ethical, you name it. But that level of ordering, when you can't just get everything from one supplier, trying to order from 20 small suppliers, that's more staff, which means you're paying more, and the local food is also going to come at a higher price. So not only is the food a higher price, but you're paying even more for staffing to order it. And, some people may not want to take those financial expenses because is the cost going to go on the student, or is the cost going to come out of the salary of these CEOs of Chartwells and Sodexo and Aramark? I would like to see it come out of these people's $1 million salaries, but they really like their money. So it's tough. But, a lot of work can be done to mandate these changes. So it's like, and I know some research that I've done, I think it was University of Toronto did some stuff with Meal Exchange years ago to kind of help shape contracts going forward where, if you're going to sign one of these big contracts with Chartwells, right? Some people will say, skip the big companies. We don't want them. They're corrupt. We want to do no big companies. And then there's this other camp of thought that says, well, these big companies have billion-dollar bank accounts and have the funding to actually scale up local food production. So if we mandate them to do better, they have the money to do better. Whereas if we get rid of them, how are we going to fund the development of local food? So it's tricky, but I've seen examples where universities say, okay, year 1, you need 20% local. Year 3, you need 25% local. And it's just like, you can contractually make those things happen. But once again, it takes staff and people power to oversee these kind of long-term projects. So I don't know if that really answered it. I kind of rambled, but it's getting sustainable food into universities is a huge undertaking that requires years of planning.
For sure. And I appreciate that. Yeah, we certainly have been doing that work as well as Meal Exchange, right, with our Good Food Challenge and trying to get this, the university signed on with those things. So it's definitely been a long road on doing some of that work. But of course, now with, this pandemic, it's definitely changed a lot of things. So we're also kind of reimagining what that looks like, in this kind of new reality of campuses, partially being shut down or fully being shut down and stuff like this. So it'll be interesting to see how in the next couple of months we start to shift that. So we're almost at the end of the show. I just wanted to ask you, Justin, do you have any kind of advice or thoughts that you want to give to students that are watching, or just generally individuals watching the show about food and systems, or whatever you'd like to share?
Yeah. So in terms of for students, one thing I'll say is whether it's food or divestment from fossil fuels or really any sort of movement, you need to understand that change takes time. And there's a value in stomping your feet and screaming for change. It's important to be heard and make noise. Please don't stop making noise. But we also need to understand that change, especially within institutions, takes time, and student movements can often lose momentum when people graduate and move on. So building longevity into a movement needs to be a priority from day one. And the work we're now doing at the Loaded Ladle is we got a grant from Canada Student Summer Jobs, and we're creating a new staff position to help form a food coalition on campus, modeled off of Concordia's food coalition. They've done some really beautiful things to keep pressuring the big Chartwells and Sodexo contracts, but what they've done is they're playing the long game. Often these contracts are 5 or 10 years long, so you can't just yell and scream that these corrupt companies are there. You need a 5 to 10 year plan to make them be different, right? And many students are only there for 3 to 5 years. So Concordia has brought in staff and faculty in part of this food coalition to help oversee some of that longevity. So we're trying to get all of the different food actors from various angles at the university to kind of unite together and form a formal coalition that can make these kind of 5 to 10 year strategies. And I was really inspired by a lecture 2 years ago. This Indigenous elder from BC came and spoke to us, and he was just so grounded and present as he was talking about all the issues we face environmentally and politically. And he said, look, it's been hundreds of years of making this mess here in what we call Canada. And his community is creating a 100-year plan forward to be thriving again, right? It's not about having our utopia we want next year. It's not going to happen. But if we can make long-term plans and be patient and persistent, then anything is possible. So I guess to sum that up is, if I have any advice, it's just, if you know the changes you want to make, don't go in expecting you can do it within a week or within a month or within a year, because you're going to burn out. But if you build a team and you focus on how longevity can be a key principle in the movement, anything is possible.
That's really good advice. Even in my own work at MSVU, sometimes I feel that way. Like I'll be, angry, or I'll have a lot of motivation one week and I'll put a lot into it. And I don't plan it out as much. And so I do get burnt out and I do get frustrated and I do get discouraged sometimes. But you're right. It really is about the long term, sustainable plans and change, because that's how it happens. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of champions and people that are invested. Yeah, it can't be rushed.
That's great. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Justin, for being on the show and for all that you're doing. Thanks so much for having such a great conversation with us.
Thank you.
Bringing to light so many really important points that I think everybody can really benefit from. So, thanks for that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again. Hopefully, we'll see you again. Take care.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, bye.
See you.
Well, Jacqueline, that was such a great conversation with Justin. Thanks so much for being a part of that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was really insightful, and I really want to connect with him more. He just had such good insights. So, thank you very much for having me today.
My pleasure. It's so great to see such awesome student leaders also being able to be a part of this conversation. So I'm really glad that you joined us as well. So thanks again for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, take care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Well, everybody, that wraps up our show for the week. Thank you so much for joining us again. What a great conversation. It's so nice to be able to, week to week speak to so many different actors and players in the food movement and the food system. So again, thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Until then, if you want to learn more about what we're doing at Meal Exchange, please go to goodfoodnow.ca. As we've said, this work that we were doing in Nova Scotia and all around the country still needs your support. So please consider making a donation if you're able. So take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.